When we first pick up the Bible and the New Testament in particular and kind of flick through it as something that we're new to, it's very easy for it to come across as just a whole bunch of random old documents about this guy called Jesus and those who were his first followers. But as we get familiar with this section in our Bibles, we realize that it is a wonderfully unified and profoundly insightful guide, not just to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, but also to what his death and the gospel he proclaimed now means for us. Thank you. The 7 key areas that apparently direct the path of our lives together are said to be faith, love, community, forgiveness, sex, money, and power. Those are meant to be the things that determine where we end up in our lives. And every single one of them is brilliantly and profoundly addressed in the pages of this wonderful library. Last week, those of us present got to think again about the second of these at Sharice and Ryan's wedding as we thought about love. At the weekend away, we got to think about the third of them as we considered community and what it means now in the light of what Jesus has done for us. And over these next few weeks together, as we move towards Advent, we're going to be thinking about the first on the list, this matter of our faith. So let me pray as we come to this. Lord, we thank you that your desire is for us to thrive in our lives, that we would flourish in every aspect, that we would discover the truth of who you are and so know the truth of who we are. So as we come to consider the book of Hebrews and this amazing topic of faith, we simply ask that you would speak by your Spirit and that we would hear. For Jesus' sake we ask it. Amen. When it comes to the matter of faith, I think the New Testament provides this amazing range of help and insight. If you're someone who's just starting out, maybe you've never really thought about faith in God or Jesus or Christianity, well, when you come to the New Testament, you find there all the data you need to have the perfect introduction to the message of this one that we now worship. If you're someone who has come to faith, and you're thinking now, well, what is it for me to live out the fullness of the message of Jesus? How do I genuinely align my life with what God has given me through his death and resurrection? Well, again, the New Testament gives you what you need. And crucially for me, further along that list, there are times in our lives, for those of us who've been on the journey for some time, where it becomes difficult to maintain our faith, challenging to uphold the belief that we have accepted through the teaching of this book through Jesus. And one of my favorite parts of the New Testament is the fact that when our fears arise, when our doubts emerge, when we start to suffer for our faith, when we start to wonder whether in fact we're okay with God at all, and our own niggling doubts come back to haunt us, well then this incredible library once again proves itself invaluable. And there is nowhere in the New Testament where this is more the case than in the book of Hebrews. When we get our confidence shaken, when our belief in Jesus starts to wane, when we wonder if we're actually good with God or not, the book of Hebrews is the perfect place to turn. It was written around AD 68 to a hard-pressed bunch of Jewish believers whose world was already difficult and unknown to them was about to become far worse. While some might have been adults at the time of Jesus' life, most of those the author is writing to are those who had heard about Jesus, had come to faith in Jesus through the preaching of the apostles or the other early followers of Jesus. And now they were finding this new faith that initially had been so exciting for them deeply difficult. Firstly, they had started to be persecuted by the Roman authorities for practicing a faith that was not licensed by the empire. Christianity was not a religio licita, as it was called, and therefore, whilst they had been Jews, their worship was just fine and accepted. They had no restrictions to their devotional lives. However, the moment they had confessed their faith in Jesus and began to follow his teaching, then they became a target for the Roman authorities, and more the Roman authorities were taking aim. Secondly, Jewish Christians were muddying the water about what was a permitted religion in the eyes of the Romans. Are you Jews, or are you these new things called Christians? And because of that, the Jewish communities were also giving a really hard time to those who had come to faith in Jesus, calling them back to Judaism, not only because maybe they didn't accept who Jesus was, but also and largely because they didn't want the waters to be muddied, lest the force of Rome be turned on both Jews and Christians. And so in their local communities, people are saying to them, well, why are you believing this stuff? Why are you moving away from the patterns of our ancestors? And thirdly, at the very same time that some were seeking to appease the Roman authorities, there were many other in Israel whose voice was more and more heard, who were wanting to do the opposite. Rebellion was in the air as this letter was written to these believers in AD 68. Right around Israel, the Zealots and others were calling its people to rise up and to get rid of these oppressors that had so ruined their lives. This was the land God had given them. They had a right to it. They had a right to stand, and now was the moment when people should stand. Sadly, in 2 years' time, in AD 70, when that ferment finally came to its fruition and Jewish people did rebel, it led to utter disaster and to the complete destruction of the Jerusalem temple, just as Jesus actually had predicted in his lifetime. It is in the midst of this setting of hardship and challenge and rebellion that the author of Hebrews writes his letter to those he loves, to encourage and to exhort them to stay firm on the course. Why do we study it? Well, because you know this without me telling you, that at some time or other, every one of us faces what these early Christians did. Our threat of persecution may not be from the Romans. Our temptation or fears may not be about us returning to Judaism. But struggle and fear, temptation and doubt is something that comes to us all. And what do we do in those moments? What do we do when we start to feel the foundations of our faith are being shaken and maybe even are crumbling? Well, in these moments, do we continue to believe in God? In these moments, can we trust that Jesus is really who he said he is, that our faith is actually making us right with God at all? Or if it's just a wishful thought that we hold. And in his writing, the author of Hebrews addresses these very questions for us as much as he does for those early believers. And his answer is relatively simple, even though it takes him all these chapters to unpack it. How can we be sure, he argues? How can you know your faith is solid? He exhorts. How can you be absolutely certain that when you meet this God who created us, who is holy and just, that you can know you can meet him without terror and fear? His answer is Jesus. Our faith, the author of Hebrews reminds us, stands firmly and entirely on Jesus, on who he is and in what he has done. My challenge today is that I have to try and summarize the first 4 chapters in one go, so that's a little bit of a test, so forgive me for skimming a little bit. But he starts out in this book, in these first 4 chapters, by simply reminding us of how special this person whose name it is we gather under. Firstly, he tells us, and Georgia, if you can help me with the slides, that would be great. He tells us that Jesus is the one who is greater than even the prophets. In Hebrews 1, verses 1 to 2, in the past, he writes, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. This one we believe in, the author reminds us, is not just a famous religious figure. Our worship isn't just around a great human teacher, nor even someone who had a vision or something given to him from God that he shared with us. This Jesus, he reminds us, who we put our faith in, is the Son of God himself, the one who is heir to all things, the one through whom all things were made. Secondly, Jesus is the one who is greater than the angels. I never thought about this passage in my life until I met Jehovah's Witnesses, who teach that Jesus was an angel, the archangel Gabriel, perhaps in another form for some of them. But again, the author reminds us, no, this one that we are putting our faith in isn't just a spiritual creature, spiritual being. He's even more than that. And thus he writes, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he'd provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. Jesus is not just God's Son in name, he is God's Son in reality. This is God himself that we are coming before when we put our faith in him. Thirdly, the Hebrew authors tell us that Jesus is the one who is greater even than Moses. And for a Jewish audience, you can just imagine someone saying that. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters, chapter 3, verses 1 to 3, who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as our apostle and high priest. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. And Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. Moses was God's greatest human servant. The more I learn about Moses as I get a little bit older in my life, the more I admire this incredible man of God. He was the one who led Israel to nationhood. But Jesus, we are reminded, is even greater than Moses. And fourthly, which brings us to our reading today, he tells us that Jesus is the one who is greater than Aaron and the high priests of Israel. And we're going to focus in on chapter 4, verses 14 to 16, if you want to look at those in your Bibles. Therefore, he writes, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we possess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. For his Jewish readers, this image of Jesus as the high priest would have been the most comforting of all. The high priesthood in Israel was crucially important, and the role of the high priest in the line of Aaron, down from the tribe of Levi, was as particularly important on the Day of Atonement, the day of Yom Kippur. It was the most sacred day in all of Israel's annual worship, and we read about it, for example, in Leviticus 16. Let me try and give you a quick summary of what the role of the high priest is in that chapter, and then you'll understand why this is such an amazing image for us to take with us. On the morning of the Day of Atonement, the normal offering would be made in the temple, the burned offering of a 1-year-old lamb. The high priest would then begin and move through all the different instructions God had given Israel for this particular and very special day. After his normal sacrifice, he would change his vestments into the garments specified by God in his word. He would wash, he would put on these garments, and then he would choose the particular animals that were needed for this special day. Animals that, in my opinion, are surprising for us when we think about it. A bull for his own sin offering, 2 male goats for the people's offering, 2 rams, one for Aaron's and one for the other people's burnt offering. And all of these creatures he would have to slaughter and sacrifice before the Lord. How am I grateful that I am part of the new covenant and these things are not upon me. The high priest would begin by offering the bull for his own sin. Before he could go anywhere near the temple, the Holy of Holies, he had to offer for himself. Before entering into the Holy of Holies with some of this blood sacrificed, in order to there, he was to create a cloud through incense, almost like a veil, if you like, before the Holy of Holies, so as to cover God's glory, because he, even with his sacrifice, would not be worthy or able to withstand it. This cloud would cover the mercy seat, as it was called. And once it was there, then he would sprinkle some of this blood over this mercy seat 7 times. 7 is the number of completion in Israeli thought. Once he'd done this, then he would go to this mercy seat, this place of propitiation, as it was called, and he would make atonement for the sins of his people. Then the first goat that was taken of the 2 for the people's offering, well, it was then sacrificed, and then its blood was taken back into the Holy of Holies, and it would be spread there as well on the mercy seat. Then outside of the tent, the second goat would be called forward, and through this ritual that the high priest would undertake, symbolically the sin of all of Israel would be placed upon this goat, and then the goat would be cast off into the wilderness, never to return. It's where we get our English phrase, scapegoat. This became the scapegoat for Israel, so that they could watch this symbolic enactment of their forgiveness and realize that God had taken their sin from them. Then, outside of the tent, Aaron would use some of the blood of the bull and some of the blood of the goat that had been sacrificed at the altar of burnt offering to cement, I guess, the imagery of both the cost and the reality of Israel's forgiveness. When the high priest finally entered the tent of meeting, he would then remove these special garments that he'd been wearing, wash himself, put on his normal priestly garb, offer the burnt offering of 2 rams, one for himself, one for his family, and the other for the people. And then the ceremony was complete. What an image Leviticus 16 gives us. What a picture of the high priest's role and his importance. Once, one day only each year, and only for a short period of time, this most important person in Israel was permitted into the Holy of Holies, that separate little part of the temple or tabernacle in the Old Testament, in order to bring sacrifice for the people. And here's the author of Hebrews' point. In the Old Testament, high priests through a veil, through special preparation for their own sinfulness, for a brief single moment, were allowed to go into a place that represented the presence of God. But Jesus, in whom we have put our faith, well, he has gone right into the presence of God in heaven. He is the one who has ascended to his Father on high. Secondly, we can rest our faith in this one who is now so amazingly located in God's presence, because he understands our nature. he now stands there as one who has walked beside us in human flesh. Jesus knows our weaknesses. He knows our temptations. He took our human form. He faced the brokenness of our world. He faced the hatred and anger of humankind. He faced his desperate trial and brutal treatment and his death upon the cross. When we come to this one who is so high and exalted, we know at the same moment that he still is able to relate to us, to know what's going on within us. As the author writes in verse 15, we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who was tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Jesus' great difference between the high priest of Israel is that he did not need to sacrifice for his own sin. There are times in our lives when we will come to great doubt about our faith. It happens to all of us. And I don't think we should ever fear doubt. T.S. Minnie used to say, doubt is the product of faith. Unbelief is a certain thing, but doubt is about faith. And I find that encouraging back when I was a kid. In these moments, where do we look? In these moments when you look around, maybe the church is the thing that has caused you to doubt your faith. Maybe the circumstances of the world around us is the thing that has caused you to doubt your faith. In those moments, where do you look? Maybe it's your own sinfulness. Maybe you've just done something, or you are thinking about what you've done and you realize, how on earth could someone like me ever be right with God in heaven? Well, the author tells us in these moments, look to Jesus. Look to who this person is, which is what he's done in chapters 1 to 4. Look to what this person has done, which is what he's about to do, as we'll see in the weeks ahead. And look to the promise that he has made to us, that is sure and certain. And if we will do that, then in these moments of doubt, we will find the comfort and the strength and the certainty that we are desperately seeking. I actually think it's a great thing to doubt your faith. I think one of the biggest weaknesses of growing up in a Christian home, for example, which I did not, is that you can just accept what everyone else is. It's kind of like a herd instinct, and you kind of go along. You go to church because your mom told you go to church, or your whoever told you to go to church, and you've always done it, so what else would I do? And I genuinely believe that's a terrible place to be in, because that is the faith of someone else that's expressing itself in your life. And what God has made clear in the gospel is that his heart and desire is each one of us will know him for ourselves. And sometimes for us to know him for ourselves, we need to question what we've simply embraced and raise our doubts, raise our fears, raise our questions. My own attitude has always been, I'm from a science background. I think if Christianity is true, it'll stand up to every single question ever asked of it. It's why I love Richard Dawkins and Dan Brown and everybody else who writes all these anti-Christian stuff. It's great for me. I get to read it, think about it. Gives me a great idea for sermon series. Because the hardest questions are tended to be asked by such things. And then we get to realize that these hardest questions are more than answered by the truth of Jesus. I remember when I was in Jamaica, with this I'm finishing, surrounding me in Jamaica was a lot of liberal theological education. Like I was in a class there where I was instructed that Jesus didn't exist, it didn't matter. It was just the body of teaching that was there. That's all that really mattered. And amongst all the things, that the cross shouldn't be used anymore because it's a foreign symbol and not one that's needed or relevant for certain cultures. And you can imagine I was kind of putting my hand up and saying, I'm not quite sure about that. And I got into reading Karl Barth, and Karl Barth had this brilliant line in his notes. He too studied through the German liberal theology that led to this kind of thinking. And he said that he gave thanks to God for every one of those theologians, because they had tested his faith. And the little phrase I'll never forget was, and now he knows he has nothing to fear. It is often coming through our doubts and challenges that we find our faith to be the strongest. So today, as we finish, we're going to sing together a Charles Wesley hymn. I hope I'm saying the right Wesley in doing that. And the language is old-fashioned, and I thank Kathy and the team for allowing me to choose this rather older hymn. We've sung it in MCC a number of times. It's "Arise, my soul, arise, shake off your guilty fears." As we sing this hymn, this passage is what Wesley had in mind. Those who were struggling not so much to believe that God was there, but struggling to believe that the God of the universe could love them, could forgive them in the gospel, that they could genuinely be free and stand in his presence as their sons and daughters. So today, let me encourage you, as this whole book is going to encourage you, hold firm to this faith that you have heard from Jesus and put in him. It will never let you down. Arise.